First Source Capital invests in early stage startups that are developing business model and technology innovations throughout the food and agriculture value chain. So these are companies that are tackling some of our greatest challenges related to production, distribution, and consumption. And so we are early stage. We are investing anywhere from pre-seed, seed, up to Series A. We plan to either lead or participate in the first institutional financing of our portfolio companies. And some of the broader investment theses are really driven by, again, some of these macro trends that we're seeing in terms of increasing consumer demand for healthier, more sustainable products, declining cost of IT, and the ability for companies to really leverage that trend. The fact that the food and agriculture market in the US is, $1 trillion market, and niches within that are billion-dollar markets, and that food and agriculture is undercapitalized relative to the opportunity and other markets. This really goes all the way back, as most lifelong passions do, to my early childhood, when I'm the first generation of immigrants, and my parents came to the United States with their tradition and their food culture. And that was really my, how I was first introduced to food, was in this very different cultural context than most of my, friends and peers in the early 1970s in suburban New Jersey. And so I was the one who brought very strange things to school and was always wanting to trade for the peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but I had a lot of vegetables and tofu and things that nobody else would touch. Interestingly, as I think many immigrants face, cultural assimilation is a complex task. And, one of the things that ultimately my family decided really meant what it meant to be an American was to actually transition our diet to more traditional. And then, this was the advent of TV dinners, some of you may remember. And so fast food, and we became, adherents to what we now call the SAD diet, the standard American diet. And that had obviously a very significant impact on me. And in one of the ways it had its most significant impact was I actually lost my father to heart disease when I was 5 years old. And, so that's sort of the early seeds of my interest in food, and agriculture kind of came secondarily as I continued to pursue a career path. I ended up becoming a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa. And I was working on maternal and child health and nutrition, and obviously, faced with some of the most challenging environments as far as widespread hunger and malnutrition are concerned, and really started to kind of piece some of these, connect some of the dots in terms of my own personal experience and what was happening in the world. And so, I think that the early seeds of my personal interest were planted, and then I just kind of continued to identify ways that I could solve for some of these big problems. And, one thing led to another, as these things do. And then the world changed around us again. And, I saw an incredible opportunity to, again, invest in these entrepreneurs that are just devoting their whole life to a very specific segment within the food system. And, it's obviously incredibly, as you can tell, I'm very passionate, very energized, and very inspired by these entrepreneurs that are driving some, incredible change. And again, in very, very big markets that are in desperate need of disruption. Big food and big agriculture are recognizing the need to pay for innovation. And it's an exciting time to be investing in the space, and to be, at the point 25 years in where I'm able to see just how much change has happened, and, how much more we're able to do. So I have been working towards creating a healthier, more sustainable food system for 25 years at this point. I spent a number of years working in the nonprofit sector, really focused on policy, the regulatory environment, as well as doing a fair amount of consumer education around the need to think differently about how we grow, produce, and distribute food here in the United States. And that includes some of the, kind of high level challenges that the food system faces, including the fact that we currently spend 20 to 40% of all healthcare spending is devoted to metabolic diseases that are related to diet, to our heavily processed and industrialized food, as well as environmental impacts of industrial agriculture, including chemicals, pesticides, toxic inputs, the fact that we utilizing those types of production systems have degraded our topsoil, such that the United Nations actually estimates that we have about 60 years of topsoil left, and that was a few years ago. So a range of issues associated with the challenges in the food system. That again, when I started this work in the early 1990s, there really wasn't the same type of innovation and entrepreneurship that we now see in the food system now, close to 20 years later. That really only started about 10 or so years ago, when I think we started to see this confluence of the recognition that business as usual in terms of how we do grow, produce, and distribute our food is untenable and unsustainable, and a tipping point in terms of what consumers are looking for in terms of healthier and more sustainable food. And I was working at the food bank, this was about 12 or so years ago, in San Francisco, and I was working to improve the quality of the school meals that were being served into San Francisco Unified School District, one of the largest urban school districts in the country. And they had been serving pretty terrible food to the kids. And of course, working at the food bank, we were very concerned about the children who rely so heavily on school meals. And what they were eating. And after a long process of trying to figure out the best way to improve that food, we ended up granting a contract to Revolution Foods. And it was one of their first contracts into a large urban school district. And just for listener awareness, if you aren't familiar with this company, it's an Oakland-based company that serves healthier, fresher school meals that now serves millions of meals across the country. And it really was a light bulb, or, aha moment for me in terms of the fact that the world was changing. And there now were entrepreneurs with incredible backgrounds and really innovative mindsets who were leveraging the market to bring solutions that at scale could have an incredible social and environmental impact. And that was very, very inspiring to me and energizing to me. And so I left the food bank in pursuit of identifying how I could best add value to this growing community of entrepreneurs. I ended up becoming an angel investor in then Imperfect Produce, now Imperfect Foods, also a company that started in the Bay Area, but now serves, I think there are over 17 cities in the US, and they started delivering ugly fruits and vegetables, so cosmetically imperfect fruits and vegetables that wouldn't be able to be sold through the standard retail channel because they didn't look perfect, but are able to deliver 30 to 40% off of retail prices direct to consumer. They've recently expanded their product offerings to deliver a range of other things and products that are quote unquote imperfect, but perfectly edible. And that really kickstarted for me what has been the last 8 or so years of my life, which has been dedicated to finding and resourcing entrepreneurs that are driving towards this broad scale change in the food system, which parenthetically, but not unimportantly, is a very large market, $3 trillion. So, small segments within food and agriculture are billion-dollar markets. So I, along with my co-founders, who are currently my venture fund partners, we founded an accelerator to really support this burgeoning community of entrepreneurs that were bringing solutions to food and agriculture. And so we built Food System 6, which is a nonprofit accelerator that is based in the Bay Area, but supports entrepreneurs from all over the country and actually all over the world. We just concluded our 5th cohort, so we will have to retabulate our statistics, but over our first 4 cohorts, we supported 30 entrepreneurs. We have a 90% survival rate, 50% female founders, which unsurprisingly, I'm very excited about, and listeners to this interview maybe as well. And we helped them raise over $40 million in blended capital. And we always knew we would raise a fund that would invest in both our accelerator graduates as well as other early stage companies in food and agriculture. But we were very, very deliberate about building Food System 6 first, because we really wanted to, again, contribute to just the growth and maturation of this entrepreneurial ecosystem, and create as big a platform as we could for entrepreneurs that were driving towards this kind of change. So we are now at the point where we have first course capital, and we are an early stage venture fund investing in companies that, again, are transforming how we grow, produce, and distribute food, and leveraging some significant macro trends in the market and frankly in the world, to bring scalable solutions that also have intrinsic in their business model a social and environmental impact. As with every other sector, it's significantly impacted by the pandemic. And, so there's, the sort of new world in terms of how, in particular, how consumer products, for example, are connecting with consumers. They're obviously not able to trial and sample in stores, which is a pretty tried and true path for, the way that products kind of make it through that channel. So we are, prior to the pandemic, of course, we started to see a transition to a more omni-channel strategy for consumer products, where they're both in retail as well as developing direct consumer pathways and channels. Clearly that, that emphasis and focus on reaching consumers directly and delivering direct has exploded in the pandemic. So that's certainly something where we're seeing a lot of activity and a lot of entrance into the market, using Facebook ad buys and doing, targeted campaigns to consumers. And so, I think that I'd say the proverbial jury is still out in terms of, if some of the buying patterns and behaviors of consumers during the pandemic are going to continue. But, that said, there has not been really a slowing in innovation. There are still an incredible number of new products that, are still trying to get out there. And, as consumers are recognizing, some might say finally recognizing that there is a relationship between what they eat and their health, which, again, it sounds quite obvious, but, many people are still kind of coming to that recognition and that conclusion. There is an increased demand in healthier, more traceable food products that, provide some level of immunity boost, right? I mean, we're starting to see people that are, people paying attention and consumers understanding that this is a really important part of their overall health and wellness. So that's on the product side, on the consumer product side. And then, the sales cycle on the production side, of course, looks very different. So, we have a very balanced portfolio in terms of both consumer products and then some of the enabling technologies and business models that are supporting this transition, agridigital being, a good example of one of those. And, that is a very complex system. So food and agriculture is heavily regulated. There are a number of aspects to investing in food and agriculture that really require a knowledge base of, what farmers and growers and ranchers are facing and their particular need set. And, the problems that they face and therefore the solutions that will help them. So that's that remains complicated and certainly not unachievable, but more complicated in the COVID environment, certainly. One of the dominant trends that we're seeing happen, I think actually plays well to this, which is the disintermediation of the supply chain. So, we see, again, both in the direct to consumer models on products, but we're also seeing direct to consumer models on, a full basket of food, for example. So Imperfect Produce, or Imperfect Foods rather, is a great example of that. Where they're actually able to reach, a wide range of people with and provide, a fuller basket of goods. And again, for 30 to 40% off retail, we're starting to see the proliferation of marketplaces. Like here in the Bay Area, there's a business called Good Eggs that is, aggregating from local suppliers and connecting them to consumers. But we're starting to see that happen in many other regions, and the technology and the software being developed that can really enable that. So it's meeting this trend of both wanting healthier, fresher food, but also being able to access it in maybe rural locations or locations where you're not typically able to connect with that type of food product. So that's kind of one dimension. The other is businesses like, for example, Thrive Market, which is another marketplace for primarily shelf-stable goods and household supplies, that has created an on-ramp for food stamp recipients to be able to purchase their items and then get them direct to their doors. So I think that's another kind of interesting way in which we can be thinking about, supporting and creating better access to healthier, fresher, better food for individuals who are in need of that support. And of course, given the pandemic and everything that is happening, there's an increased need on that side.